We're now going to hear from Dr. Dana Burr Bradley from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I was wondering what the MC was, BC was. So,
yeah, right.
Please.
Right, now for something.
I've never heard the term social.
I'm a social, all right, so, and let me get this up on the screen. So I had instructions on how to do this. Take this black thing. I'm not a technician. I'm a historian by training. But even I can take directions. Okay, and this goes in here, I think. Yeah. It's a miracle, she said. All right. And then they told me to, now since I can't read Hebrew, how to start my slides. But F5, just F5? Oh, that wasn't what they told. Okay, F. Yes. Now I see, I can do this too. Okay. Get this down so I'm in the right leg. All right, so I am the dean of the Erickson School of Aging Studies. And we are one of 3 schools in the U.S. that only does aging. And I'm a new dean, so I've been there since August. And I am delighted to be here. And thank you, Mira, for such an amazing few days. You and your team have made me feel so welcome. And I feel like I've made friends for life with so many of the folks that I've had the opportunity to meet. So thank you. I'm going to take just a second. This is like a little announcement. So those of you who are coming to there's a cocktail thing after, right. So I have one of my she used to be an undergraduate student, but there's Laura Allen. Laura, do this, see? And I want you to go over later, and I've embarrassed her, but we can do that, right? It's okay. She's studying as a Marie Curie scholar here in Israel in a program in gerontology and aging. So I have to come all the way from the east coast of the U.S. to Israel to see my former student. But she's doing amazing things. So my request is at the reception, please take a moment to talk to her. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about something very different. And the title here really should be a paradigm shift. I realized as I was, kind of thinking about what I was going to do, I am going to talk about research directions a little bit, but that's, we all do research and it's exciting, but I really need you to think about what you do differently. And I realized in all this discussion about healthy aging, so it's not on my slide, because I didn't put it, because I thought, well, people all day would have talked about what's the definition of healthy aging. And I didn't see that. Now, maybe I missed it, but I don't think so. And so this dovetails very nicely on the previous presentation, and there's lots of them. In the States, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, has a whole program on healthy aging. NIH puts money into healthy aging. But I picked the World Health Organization. That seems ecumenical, right? That seems like a good one? Okay, good. Healthy aging is about creating the environments and opportunities that enable people to be and do what they value throughout their lives. So I would use the term life course, which is a sociological term, but talks about in many ways from birth to death, right? And so what I'm going to talk about is that perspective of healthy aging, not about the very end of life, but really arguing why we need to think about that entire lifespan or life course, all right? Okay, so now I need to make this move. I can do this. Just do that. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. So what are the effects of adding years to the lifespan? We've been talking about that all day, but really from one perspective. That lengthening to extreme, adding years and years and years, that whole, we can do it from the, demography is destiny perspective we just heard, that was very nuanced and very, very informative. But in effect, it drains, having all these old people, drains our family systems, our social systems, and our governmental systems. And you're nodding, going, yeah, that's right. It's a drain. It's it is what it is. Or you could think about adding all these years to the human lifespan as a longer middle age, resulting in extending the period when individuals are presumably the most productive and creative. Those are two very different ways of constructing reality. Guess which one I like? The economic value of this extension is what we call the longevity economy. And so the term may be familiar to many of you, but it is, in the US, valued at about $7.1 trillion a year. There's lots of different ways we can calculate it. We look at consumer spending, healthcare spending. Twice as many startups in the US are created by people over the age of 50. And in that entrepreneurial spirit. Well, and it could be, and I hear you on that, it could be that we either don't recognize it or aren't providing the resources. Or we make the assumption that people who are only a certain age can come up with splashy, new, nifty ideas. I don't know. Just throw that out there. Generates almost 100 million jobs. This is just in the US. And I'm not including things like volunteerism or philanthropy. Now, the little trick as I'm doing this, and I'm going to be honest about this in terms of demography since we've had a couple of presentations, I'm looking at this as people who are over the age of about 50. And so I'm moving that clock back a little bit. Why is it important? I think it's something that the Erickson School spends most of our efforts in our education programs, our research, our applied work, and our doctoral programs.
No,
Something's not right? Is it me?
No.
No?
It's you, you know. Okay.
It is, right? It takes a world. It takes a village here. Okay, good. All right, first. Because it changes the narrative about longevity and aging. And I told you up front, I'm a historian. I can tell you lots of things about the past. I don't know nothing. I know very little about the future. But what do historians do? We tell stories. We work in the narrative, whether it's qualitative or quantitatively done. And when we look at the possibilities for aging and shift those to something that's not focusing on the very end of life, but focusing on extending those years in the middle, which we do, it changes that narrative. And second, from an economic standpoint, not only can we afford this growing number of older adults, but we need to realize they are not a drain on the economy. This is radical. They are a key driver of economic growth, innovation, and new value creation. Now that challenges fundamental perspectives if we're looking at making an argument in terms of resource distribution. Some of the things we just heard about, thinking about that, and I would use, again, the life course perspective, but why do we invest in schools? Whether they're for young children, middle-aged children, or students of all ages. What, you graduate from high school or technical school and you stop learning? Right? We don't do that. So when we talk about investing in education, it is across that entire lifespan. But, okay, I have a but. We all have buts. In the private sector, and so what I do at the Erickson School, I work primarily in private and nonprofit work. We do quite a bit with the US and state governments. But I spend a lot of what we call in my space. As a dean, I work a lot with people who are just this, entrepreneurs, folks in the private sector, again, for-profit, nonprofit, addressing the needs of 100 million people, which is about what we think is in this longevity economy. They call it an opportunity. So we talk a lot about the silver opportunity, not the silver tsunami. And so in AARP for a long time, a number of people would talk about the challenges of an aging population. Again, we've heard that quite a bit today, right? As a tsunami. Now, what do tsunamis do? And no one used that term, but what do tsunamis do when they... Is it a happy, good event when they hit? No, it's terrible, right? It's, you know, it destroys geography, topology, and it kills people. So instead, the frame flip here, the paradigm shift, is to see this group of, very large group of older adults, age, and as the population ages, as an opportunity, as a silver opportunity. Right? Within the longevity economy are large areas that are ripe for innovation, disruption, and investment opportunities, driven by new research. So here's the link, and I was going to be very brief here, because I knew I'd be at the end, and between you and the panel and something else. So as researchers, you know, you are the ultimate entrepreneurs. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. I know in the States, a lot of our research is driven either by economic issues or working through that tenure and promotion, lovely climate that is often not supportive of that entrepreneurial mindset. But indeed, you really are entrepreneurs, and that's why you're in research. These are all in areas where products and services are what we call suboptimal. Consumers spend a lot, and they do, and this is true in the States, this is true in a lot of other economies, but make do while their needs, wants, and preferences go unmet. Now, if Dame Porter was in the room, I would publicly thank her. We have a lot to thank her for all her support. But those of you who were here this morning, I hope you were listening carefully to her introductory remarks. What did she say about her suitcase? The preference about her suitcase. She said, if someone would just ask me what I need, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I didn't pay her to say that, but I was sitting over there and I'm going, yeah, I couldn't. I mean, she said it much more eloquently than I possibly could. But from our standpoint is often, as researchers, or in whether it's in consumer, but in basic, we don't think to even ask the people that probably would benefit the most from what we're doing. And I couldn't have demonstrated it better. I mean, she was very eloquent, and I was thinking, great product design. But also she was speaking, you know, that she doesn't feel heard, and she's looking for things the people are not creating for her. Very important lesson. Okay. For example, retail. So the retail shopping experience, whether it's face-to-face or online, how often do you think is designed for people that don't look like, okay, I'm gonna pick on you. Laura. I'm just, you know, hypothetically asking this, but I know it's actually true. There's assumptions that the consumer behavior isn't necessarily segregated out by age. Transportation, travel. I love going through airports. I love traveling, but I am consistently flummoxed, wondered, particularly, I'm going to go through yes, I have not left Israel outbound yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing a different perspective. This is my first time in Israel. But in the U.S., security can be challenging in part because it's never the same from one airport to the next. And so in traveling, I often look out for people of a certain age that are traveling together, particularly maybe a partner, spouse, or sometimes an older adult is traveling alone. And I'm always just shocked at there's no translation that goes on. People yell at them. People expect them to understand how the security process works, the lights, the sound. There's just a lot going on. And if you travel a lot like me, I know the drill. I can get my shoes off faster than, someone heading to the beach. But travel opportunities, whatever that might be. Am I not? Oh, it's still, no, I think, is it this?
No, it's it.
You have to look at me, you have to say, I didn't realize. I've had I spent hours on this PowerPoint. Okay, you can laugh.
Thank you.
It's back, thank you. Yeah. Some people have fancy graphics. I'm like, that's not my shtick. Okay, social media, consumer electronics, Education, I mentioned that earlier. So at least in the US, we are really worrying. So yeah, if I do this. Okay, I'm going to stand like this. Yeah, now I do. Thank you. No, it's a learning thing, right? We can learn all new things at all ages. In the States, we are really worried. I mean, hand-wringing, closing almost universities because there are fewer people between the ages of 18 and 22. A surprise, right? People are acting like it's a surprise. You could see it coming for years. And so units of higher education in the States have to reinvent themselves. Right? So when I talk about education across the lifespan, it is the ultimate silver opportunity if people can make the money work. Okay. Health and wellness, right? And that's a big one. And I think the health and wellness resonates the most with people here in the room. Okay. So I have overarching research themes. Very, very briefly, if I was talking for 2 hours, I would tell you lots about these, but I knew I wouldn't be. So, health and wellness, and I think the primary focus I see and what we're focusing on at the Erickson School is expanding the meanings of home. Right, so, and I want to be clear, meanings, plural, of home. Not just aging in place, but working from the perspective of someone who is growing older. They define where home is, and it's up to us to figure out ways to support that vision. Right? Workforce, multiple pathways to growth. And we know particularly in senior care and housing, we need a number of trained care workers across all disciplines, and there are not enough of them, and we can't pay them enough. So there are huge market forces at work, but particularly in terms of training and pipeline to this. And on the same side, we also know that people want to continue working longer. Not only do they want to, they have to, in terms of economic security models. Right. So I'm going to go back and thank Dame Porter personally, because I was talking earlier about technology innovation. And you made a comment first thing in the morning, and I know everyone heard you, but I was going, yes! It was about your suitcase. And so thank you, because that was like it made it seem like what I'm talking about is real. So thank you very much. Okay, so the environment, and what I mean there is uncertainties to plan for, and we certainly talked about this a lot during the Dead Sea Institute in very, very compelling ways. I charge a lot of the companies that we work with and do consulting with. I ask, is environmental change in your business plan? And they look at me like I have, two horns on my head, because they may have disaster management plans. How do you move people in and out? I'm talking about where do you locate your business, your services? How are you going to get your workforce to and from, not only with one disruption, but multiple disruptions? And how are we accounting for climate change on people who may be more fragile as they age? So it could be children, but also how do you manage extreme heat? And are there other ways besides turning up the air conditioning? So leads to lots of questions about wearable cooling devices in your clothes. I mean, there's just huge things in there. And big data, possibilities to discover. And I think the big question there is who owns the data? And lots of questions, but who owns it? And I want you to think about this. Those 100 million people I talk about in the US, they're all data. They are all data. And so people are regularly collecting data on them, with them, for them. Right? Just this, all those wearable things we're talking about, that's a tremendous set of data. And who owns it? So I'm full of questions, not a lot of answers. Okay, I wanted just to show you this graph, and I know I'm running out of time. Quick. This is an AARP one, but I wanted you to see it because this is just in terms of health and wellness. And what's particularly interesting, I'm not sure, it kind of shows up. So the bottom half, so the top half are kind of digital technology. So maybe just think of this as health and wellness in the digital frame. Again, that has applications for many of you in the room and things we've talked about. And it's the bottom half here that we often don't think about in that health and wellness frame. And I think the biggest places for growth are in those. Right? Okay. What's the biggest challenge? See, I'm full of questions. I'm talking about an estimated 36 trillion in market capitalization. It's a lot of money, ripe for disruption, for those people who are ready to do the work and think differently. Is it training? All right, you know, we have NIH and NIA postdoc training grants now. I think there's foundations that are putting money into it. What we do at the Erickson School is actually take people who are either in business or who have expertise in aging and meld those two together with technical assistance and innovation and mentorship. So training could be collaborations. Okay, people who often speak the same language still pass in the night. And indeed, what have we learned from the Dead Sea Institute and our time here today? How wonderful it is, the gift that we have of spending some time with each other to just think about things differently. And that's often the way collaborations begin. So could be, that's a big challenge. Resources. It's always about money. No, I don't think so. I mean, in the US now, NIA, the pay line is about 30%, particularly if you can tie your research to anything related to dementia. Again, not saying you should, but tremendous amount of market capital that's waiting to fund different initiatives. So maybe, no, I think this is the fundamental challenge. You have to understand what older people actually want, or better yet, anticipate what they will want before they even know they will want it. You need to base your research agenda on that and not on a 1990s stereotype of what an older person is. They are not all old, they are not all frail, and they're not dependent. That won't work. And funders are increasingly going to look to see that you actually understand this larger picture of what aging really is. So I think that's the fundamental challenge that I hear, that I see both in research, not only going from funding and bench research, but to getting capitalization, moving things to a market perspective. So that's my fundamental challenge. I am delighted to have been here. Thank you for your time. And I know we've got a next thing up. Thank you. Yeah. What did I say? I was, you know.
The concept is,
Yeah.
call it a robustness of narrative.
Yeah, all right.
The term robustness
Yeah.
describes how dependent on the context.
Right.
I wonder how the anti-collaborative are just taking, 50 years is nothing.
Right, yeah, no, yeah.
60, you do that. Go for 60. And I would like to get analysis how the market older than 70.
Right, and I would say it's really not older than 70. And again, I'm mostly using US, a US frame of reference here. And again, there's huge divergence or differences among class and access to services and that kind of thing. But I think often the narrative we hear about aging, it is much more close to those that are 80, 85, 90, and 95. And we're sort of written off, people at this vast earlier age. Yeah.
I have a comment. Question. Comment is lifelong learning.
Right.
In fact, my mother, 1 year old.
Excellent, yeah.
But I wanted to make another comment. It was what we heard earlier about how older people needing parenting. I wonder if we're making a fundamental mistake by their aging. Maybe what we should be thinking people in different phases of lives, not necessarily within a linear where you become old and when you're 92, you're so dependent. Or you could be creative when you're 10 years
Right.
old and you could be
Right.
30 years.
Yeah.
And so why do we think of this in terms of
Right, I think it's easier, right? And we've built institutions around it. So we were talking in two talks ago about institutions. And again, why do we have, in many industrialized countries, the age at which you can receive a pension? And, I'd say state pension, but Social Security in the U.S. And, there's a great history in the U.S. about 65. And before that, trying it out at different ages at the state level. And really, the reason it's 65, or it was set at 65, was very few people lived at the time in 1935 more than 2.5 years. 1 point. So it was there was a rationale behind that. So dependency and the discussion about parenting your children. The reversal of roles. And when we work a lot in the States in training to talk about how we make decisions together, right? So it's in fact, it's best practice, and it's legal. It's not legal to come in and act as a guardian unless you've been appointed one, right? Other countries, other places have different norms. I would argue as researchers that you should remember that older people are just like you. They're just older. And to assume that they have needs, you have to have the data to back it up. Yeah.
Biological age.
Yeah. I mean, and a good example, and I hear you, so many of you have seen me, I've been walking around with a boot on, right? And I was in a car accident a month ago. And when it happened, it's the first time in a long time I was thinking maybe when I was pregnant, I was completely dependent. I couldn't tie my shoe, I couldn't, there were a lot of things, it was all about what I couldn't do. It was a deficit model. And so another thing we hear about in terms of policy that goes along with the longevity economy is to think about aging as an asset model. What do people bring? And this is particularly true in social planning more than maybe bench science, of course.